downloading from Ravi Zacharias International Ministries. Support for this podcast comes from your generous gifts and donations. You can find out more about Ravi Zacharias and the team at www.rzim.org.
Movement is nothing more than mitigating the bankruptcy of secularism with the spurious glitter of Eastern mysticism. Secularism is bankrupt spiritually.
While New Age philosophy and Eastern religion saw a surge of popularity some years ago, they left behind some lasting marks on the American culture and the Western world. Think of how often reincarnation and karma are mentioned in popular movies and music. And yet, how much do most of us really know about New Age philosophy and its Eastern roots? Hello and welcome to Let My People Think with author and apologist Ravi Zacharias. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been looking at what New Age thinkers believe and how New Age philosophy has impacted the culture. More recently, we've looked specifically at the religion of Hinduism, which is where many New Age beliefs originate. As we finish up today, Ravi will first discuss how Eastern beliefs made inroads into the West, and then he'll help us figure out how to minister to a Hindu or New Age follower. Here's Ravi.
Vivekananda became the man who brought Hinduism to America. Vivekananda became the man who brought Hinduism to America. And what happened when Vivekananda came here in 1893 is what I'm going to leave with you as the turning point nearly 100 years ago of how Hinduism became accepted in the western part of the world and why America gave it the kind of allegiance that it did. Now, this is very fascinating material to get into, but I want your careful attention. When he came to Chicago, Vivekananda was treated as a non-entity. All of the big speakers were talking there. Then all of a sudden, Vivekananda, uninvited, went up to the platform, and in his opening remarks, he said this, and I want you to listen to what he said. Please notice the sensitivity of what he said, and I think it's fascinating why he said it. We who come from the East have sat here on the platform today, and have sat here day after day, and have been told in a patronizing way that we ought to accept Christianity because Christian nations are the most prosperous. We look about us and see England, the most prosperous Christian nation in the world, with her foot on the neck of 250 million Asiatics. We look back into history and see that the prosperity of Christian Europe began with Spain. Spain's prosperity began with the invasion of Mexico. Christianity wins its prosperity by cutting the throats of its fellow men. At such a price, the Hindu will not have and does not want prosperity. I have sat here today and I have heard the height of intolerance from you all. I have heard the creeds of the Muslims applauded when today the Muslim sword is carrying destruction into India. Blood and sword are not for the Hindus whose religion is based on the laws of love. When he finished, they broke out into a thunderous sustained applause and Hinduism dawned in America. It's very significant for you to understand it. How did he touch the nerve? Notice he did not go into philosophizing. As a matter of fact, if you read Vivekananda and read Ramakrishna, you will find that Ramakrishna in his pantheon of gods included Jesus. He included even Mary. He even included Buddha. He even included Muhammad. His was a cosmic vacuum cleaner type thing, bring them all into this one system. But none of that is what he used here. What did he use? He touched a raw nerve. And for 100 years now since that speech, and for decades before that, please understand what I'm saying here, he introduced a point of prejudice which has made the propagation of Christianity very difficult in most parts of the globe today. You can talk to almost any Jew today, any Muslim, any Hindu, and he will trace you back to the atrocities that were committed in the name of Christ for centuries. That is the umbrella under which you and I have to live. And that is the tragedy. Because in the Middle Eastern and the Eastern world, history never dies. It always lives. Mahatma Gandhi was asked what he thought of Christianity. He said, I like their Christ, I don't like their Christian, because when I think of the Christian, he said, I think of the Christian with a mug of beer in one hand and a chunk of beef in the other hand. What did he say here? Is they've got their foot on 250 million Asiatics. And so with that gunboat philosophy, as the missionaries came in, unfortunately became identified with it. So today, when you talk to an Orthodox Hindu and try to minister to him for Christ, remember this statement that I read to you. Because it brings with it an unfair perception. But that is the perception. Any prejudice will distort your perception. I was speaking to about 1,200 people in an auditorium. One of my colleagues was there with me. Most of them were Hindus. At the end, there were 153 who made first-time commitments to Christ that night. Most of them high-placed executives. There was a Hindu executive in the first or second row. He went over to my colleague in India, who's our fellow evangelist there, and he went over to him afterwards and said to him, if anybody here was not touched tonight, I want to see that man. That's the degree to which the Lord had spoken to him that night. But then he went over to his subordinate who had invited him to the meetings, and he said to his subordinate, the only reason I came here tonight is because that man is Indian. That shocked me. But there is a large group of people with whom that prejudice still exists. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the only application I can make for you is this. Therefore, if you're trying to reach a Hindu for Christ, it's a long road. And one of the roads that you'll have to cross is his confidence that you love him or her for who they are, not for something that you're trying to manipulate them into. So the first handle you need to get is when Vivekananda came here, he touched a colonial and a racial nerve. And you see, this is very fascinating. I hate to get sidetracked, but I do a lot of lecturing on ethics. The only thing that is illegitimate in America now is prejudice. Virtually anything else you can do. But if you can brand something as prejudice, then it is automatically considered wrong. But what has happened now is they have taken issues of race and culture and all of that and now applied it to creed. And what it really means is if you believe something to be exclusively true, you're considered prejudiced. Are you with me? So that the moment I say on a university campus that Jesus Christ is the only way to God, I'm immediately discounted as somebody who is too prejudiced in this matter. And the word becomes a kind of an umbrella and a catch-all, so that prejudice is used now from race where it was legitimately used because prejudice is wrong there. Now it is used to morality, so that if you're living an immoral life and I say I don't agree with your morality, I'm considered prejudiced. But you see, feel the nerve. Number one, a colonial and a racial nerve was touched in that sense. Number two, it married biological science. He did that brilliantly in his subsequent lectures. He said, for example, Darwin is talking about evolution, said he. Please follow me. We as Christians have failed this. We have failed this so often, which Easterners have caught on to. He said, Darwin talked about evolution. He said, what do you think Hinduism is about? It is the evolution of spirituality. Man is evolving to become the absolute impersonal divine. So you see how they took biological science and identified it with Hindu teaching. What did Christians do? Immediately when biological science threatened it, we sort of put it away on the block. And we sort of lost the contest in intellectual terms so that we are seen as Christians today as those who do not know how to deal with science. And Maharishi Mahesh Yogi comes here with his transcendental meditation and writes a book, The Science of Being and the Art of Living. He took Vivekananda's Darwinistic evolutionism, put it into the Hindu philosophy of how man is evolving into the divine being. Smart genius. So number one, touched the racial nerve. Number two, married it to biological science. Number three, based it on theoretical physics. I want you to know that at this point, Neither the Heisenberg uncertainty principle nor Einstein had clearly defined their terms, but relativity was being used. And what he did, follow me now. Listen to what I said about evil earlier. Maya, illusion, non-real. Vivekananda took this and said, what do you think we as Hindus have been telling you about? That this whole business of morality and good and evil is relative. If you look at Fritjof Capra's book, The Tao of Physics, he will tell you how this theory of relativity and the Heisenberg uncertainty principle converted him to become a New Age follower. I won't go into the details, but this stuff gets heavier and heavier, and in many ways, in some way, the whole fabric gets richer and richer. So he took the colonial motif, he took the biological science, he took the theoretical physics, then fourthly, he took the physical science, where the first law of motion was challenged. You remember, in Aristotle, we needed a first mover, a prime mover. But by the time Newton and Galileo had done their work, these planetary systems did not need a prime mover. They remained in their state of motion or rest. And all of a sudden, you began to find he was explaining this whole thing that we did not need a first cause. So when he touched the colonial motif, enter guilt. When he moved to the biological motif, exit creator. When he moved to the theoretical physics motif, exit morality. When he moved to physical science motif, exit providence. So you have lost the creator, you have lost the provider, you have lost the morality, and it all started with touching the nerve that you have dominated us, you have got your foot on it as it were, and he says, we want to tell you where our religion is coming from. And the intricacy gets only deeper and deeper. And the last thing he did, one more, he went into political theory and ultimately brought the caste system in. And the way he did that was, he said, you all talk of individual rights. And his speech said, you talk of rights, rights, rights. He said, I'll tell you where we Hindus are coming from. We are all equal. We are all an expression of the divine. And that greeting of sanctity and reverence and so on, he put the whole footage on an even platform. And if you take these 5 issues that I have given to you, let me retrace them because I think this is pivotal. The colonial motif brought in a sense of guilt. Then he took us to biological science, and by the time he was through there, exit God as creator. Then he took us to theoretical physics with relativity, exit a moral law and morality. Then he took us to physical science of the laws of motion, exit providence and the first cause. Then he went to political theory, exit individuality, and you've got this commonality motif and all of that comes in. How they lived with that and struggled with the caste system and all the other things is the unfolding drama of their philosophy and tension with their practice today. I would like to say that between Ramakrishna and between Vivekananda, these two people, if you can understand what they have said, you get a heartbeat and the struggle of where Hinduism really is at this point. And I would like to try and bring this all to a conclusion by giving you some principles in which you and I as Christians need to respond to it. Number 1, when you're dealing with a Hindu, always go slowly. Go slowly. Please do not try to move fast. It never comes that quickly. Number 2, show respect for what he or she believes without compromise. One of the missionary candidates who applied in an organization I shall leave unnamed, but I got involved in trying to see if we could get a government officer to help him change his visa. This young man, although a Canadian or an American by race, was born in India and knew some of the Indian languages better than I do. And he loved the country and wanted to go back, applied for a missionary visa, and they asked him purpose for coming, and he put down there to teach people about God. He will never, ever get a visa. They turned him down on a blacklist. my father was alive at that time, he was going to try and contact, because my dad was very highly placed in the government and in fact was in charge of the visa department, would probably have been able to try to do something. Shortly before he left, my dad passed away. But when he found out what had been said, he said, they will never change that line. He said, you don't tell a people of that respect for their own heritage that you're coming there to teach them about God when the whole nation is steeped in religion. So there has to be a definite sense of showing respect and without compromising. Number 3, do not assume that just because you are not identical in the culture, therefore you cannot reach the person. It's just tougher, but it shows a process of love and it can be done. It takes the patience, but it must be done. 4th, always listen to their felt problems. It is one thing to talk, it is another thing to listen, and each person feels it differently. Number 5, the young people are the most widely open to it. Number 6, focus on the person of Christ and personal relationship. And I could go into doctrines that give them trouble, such as the doctrine of sin, such as the problem with denominationalism, such as the problem with exclusivity, and so on. But the last thing I want to say to you is, please allow for the supernatural, because I am convinced in most religions like Islam and Hinduism is steeped in idolatry. Islam has a doctrine of angels and an awful lot of satanic influence in their religion, so that when you see even a Muslim convert for years to come, you'll see all kinds of struggle with what they've got in terms of oppression, possession, and so on. Allow for the intervention of the supernatural in many of these. And lastly, I say, be careful after the point of commitment to try to deluge them with too much too soon. If you look at 2 Kings 5, when Naaman believed in Yahweh, and Naaman the Syrian, and he looked at Elisha and he said, I want to ask you a question. When I go back and my master asks me, when he leans on me to bow down before his own God of Rimmon, even though I will not be bowing down because he leans on me, my body half bends involuntarily. Is it all right for me to be there in the temple of Rimmon while my master is leaning on me? Elisha doesn't even answer the question directly, he just says to him, you go on, go in peace. And I think it is because Elisha felt Naaman would come to his own conviction and his own answer in the right time. You couldn't prescribe it with a sense of immediacy and send him on. Let me give you one beautiful illustration and then tell you why all of this has appealed to the Westerner, and then close here. My uncle is a Hindu, and I think this is an interesting story for you to hear. In his car, all kinds of idols on the dashboard. I have known him for about 10 years. Every time he came to listen to me preach, he would put his arm around me, almost like saying, I'm very proud of you. I said, wait a minute, I poured my heart out trying to tell you what this message is about in Christ. But the suctioning in goes on. It adds, never subtracts. So this uncle of mine would come for every meeting, and we were preaching. And on Sunday morning, after I finished preaching, I said to my wife, something has happened to Uncle Eddie. I said, he looks at me differently, he talks to me differently. And after I finished the message in the church to which he came, he took me to a friend of his in his wheelchair and said, son, will you pray for this friend of mine? I thought to myself, what does he want me to pray for a friend of his about? Where's he coming from? The next day he said, I'd like to have breakfast with you. So he and my aunt came. Sundar, we were all at the table. And Sundar being from an immediate Hindu background, and Sundar was at the table, and we were eating, and he said, can you excuse us for a moment? And he told us he'd want to talk to him, went and sat down for about 1 or maximum 2 minutes. And they came back. I thought to myself, wonder what happened in 2 minutes. So Sundar tells us afterwards, you know what he said to me? He sat down and said to me, I wanted to become a Christian some time ago, but I went to see a priest, Catholic priest there, and the priest said to me, no, please don't become one. You are intended to remain in the religion in which you are born. You're intended to remain in the state in which you were born. So he says to Sundar, what do you think of that? The Lord gave Sundar wisdom. Sundar had just one question for him. He said, would you have felt the same way if you were poor? And he says to him, thank you, that answers my question. You can tell Prakash, who's our evangelist there, that I have become a Christian. I now want to get baptized. When I was there again, shortly thereafter, he dropped me off at the airport, and he and my aunt put their arms around me. And my aunt said to me, son, how can I ever thank you for what you did for Uncle? I said, Auntie, did you hear what he said when he was getting baptized? He told the pastor before he got baptized, for all these years I kept saying, no man will ever convince me of Christianity. Let us take him at his word. No man did. I said, Auntie, the Spirit of God did. It happens. It happens in the strangest way of intervention. Why is it that it appeals to the Westerner? Listen here. This is a writer on Asian religions. The new Hinduism encourages a search within oneself to achieve harmony with the forces of change in the modern world. The inner search is attractive to many today. To fall into the flow of things, to get into touch with the process of growth, to sense a harmony with divine energy which works beneath the more visible forces of change in the world is an inviting alternative to struggling with moral choices. And then he says this, and it is especially appealing to those who are troubled by a sense of incompetence before the impersonal institutions which manipulate us. Caving into the pressures for conformity and going with the flow is far easier than finding good reasons to take a stand at some position of moral obligation. What this philosophy has done has given the Westerner the opportunity of having his cake and eating it too. Now he can say there are no moral absolutes. Now he can say there is no personal God. Now he can say I can sit in the middle of the day and meditate and do what I want and then go out there and live for the world, the flesh and the devil, as it were, and pay out my karma as time comes out. It gives them a backdoor for escape. And that's why I say the New Age movement is nothing more than an attempt at mitigating the bankruptcy of secularism with the spurious glitter of Eastern mysticism. Can I repeat that for you? The New Age movement is nothing more than mitigating the bankruptcy of secularism with the spurious glitter of Eastern mysticism. Secularism is bankrupt spiritually. What did Vivekananda do? He said, you want to believe in evolution? Believe in it with one difference. Darwin's was materialistic evolution. I will give you spiritual evolution. Every day, in every way, I'm getting better and better. Even though our wars and rumors are wars, 1,000 times will belie us. Pantheism has a tremendous attraction. And the spurious glitter of pantheism is beginning to fade with the rugged attacks of reality. And you and I are called to go into this kind of a world. Nearly 1 billion people in India. And when you add Buddhism to that, Buddhism in China, Buddhism in Japan, Buddhism in Thailand, Buddhism in Indonesia, Buddhism in Cambodia, Buddhism in Vietnam, it's called Buddhism. Most of it is really more spirit worship and animism. But you take the pantheistic worldview and you've got billions of people in that, and the glitter is beginning to wear. But the allegiance to culture is so strong that it will take time. When the gospel message shines through the intervention of divine grace, the heart will suddenly say, I know what it is all about.
Stay with us because Ravi Zacharias will be back in just a moment with a closing thought as he wraps up this series on New Age and Eastern religions. We hope these messages have helped you be a little better equipped to engage a New Age thinker, or maybe a Hindu in a conversation about the gospel. Perhaps you've been challenged to move beyond fear or discomfort to be available to be used by God in the lives of others. If you'd like to explore the theme of New Age and Eastern religions in greater depth, you may be interested in the 3-disc set entitled A Meeting of Minds. The album features 3 messages on the topic, including today's. The message you heard today is available in its entirety on CD. And when you contact us, just ask for the Spurious Glitter of Pantheism. You can also order online at www.rzim.org, where you'll find several products to help you in your search for truth, or to assist you in sharing the gospel with friends and family. That's rzim.org. Besides the website, you can also contact us by phone at 1-800-448-6766. The order line is available 24 hours a day. That number is 1-800-448-6766. If you prefer to write, address your envelope to RZIM, Post Office Box 921-939, Norcross, Georgia, 30010. That's RZIM, Post Office Box 921-939, Norcross, Georgia, 30010. Now let's get back to Ravi for a closing thought.
In my colleague Sundar's life, nuclear physicist by training, one of India's gold medalist students, at the age of, in our teenage years, went to hear the gospel, and although he himself so highly educated now, made a commitment to Christ when a man who had not even gone to high school gave his testimony, and he made a commitment that night. So the glitter is spurious, and you proclaim, you will see the results, and we have the world at our doorstep.
Thanks, Ravi, for that reminder of the great opportunities that lie ahead. I hope you'll join us again next week as Ravi begins a new series on the impact that ignoring absolute truth has had on our culture. Let My People Think is a listener-supported radio ministry and a production of Ravi Zacharias International Ministries, Atlanta, Georgia.